Yeah, g'day people. Another chainsaw video. I hear everyone say, oh no, not another one. Yeah, but hopefully I can shed a light on a few things, especially for the beginners. Let's just say that you've gone from a file and you're going to upgrade to a chainsaw sharpener. So I'm going to go over some things to avoid the pros and the cons, if you will. Probably the first thing I'll talk about is the wheels. So normally a chainsaw grinder will come with two wheels. They'll both be the same width, which will be about 145 millimeters in width, but you'll find out that the thickness of the wheel will vary. For the chains that are 1/4 inch and 3/8 low profile, you'll be using a 3.2 millimeter width wheel. For the chains that are 0.325, 3/8 standard and 404, you'll use a 4.7 millimeter width wheel. So they're the two different thicknesses of the wheels. Now, the better wheels, like this is from Kinnick, Taiwanese company, you'll find out that has a paper washer either side. The cheaper ones only have a paper washer one side. This is very thin paper. This is a bit thicker, about twice as thick as that. So what's the idea of the paper washer, I hear you ask? It helps the surface of the outside washer that compresses on here so that the wheel mounts correctly and very little wobble is there. Now, we'll go over mounting the wheel and we'll talk about that. So, the first thing, or one of the first problems that you can have in mounting a wheel is that if it's not mounted properly with the paper on either side, you may get some wheel wobble. So, we'll put this in nice and slowly. And we'll put the washer with the cap screw on, and I'll just tighten that up by hand. I just spun the wheel. It looks nice and straight, so we'll just tighten it up. Now, you don't tighten it up real tight, just nip it up. It won't come loose. Now, what I want you to see, and we'll just see if we can bring that over, is that wheel. We'll zoom in there. That wheel should be nice and straight. See how lucky I was. So if I spin the wheel, look at that. That's nice and straight. That's beautiful. No wheel wobble on that. That's great. Now, from time to time, you will use the dressing stone and you'll dress the wheel. You'll use the stone and you'll go backwards and forwards around the wheel and trying to use this plastic card as your template to make sure that the wheel, let's see if we can zoom in there, fits that pretty good like that. Now, you don't have to be critical on the wheel. As long as it's got a reasonable radius on it, it'll be fine. Yeah, so don't worry too much about that. It only needs to be checked occasionally. As I said, it's not critical. So we'll just lock that up. So this is 4.7 millimeters in width. So this is going to be for 3/8 chain or 404 chain. So that's pretty straightforward. So every time you mount your wheel, spin it, make sure you don't have any wheel run out, anything that's bad. If the wheel has a bit of wobble in it when you spin it, up to say 1/2 millimeter or so, then what you need to do is undo the nut and put the wheel in a different position. Sometimes you've got to play with that a couple of times. Occasionally you can get a wheel, it's just going to drive you crazy and it'll never mount properly. It'll always have a bit of wheel wobble in it. In that situation, I like to install more paper gaskets. Doesn't happen often, but it's like anything else when it does happen. So this type of gasket, it's only very, very thin cardboard. This will go on the outside, and the one with a hole on it, that's this one here, that'll go on the inside. As I said, it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, there's because if you don't get your wheel lined up properly, and you find out that because the wheel has a bit of a wobble on it, that means that 100%, it's almost impossible to get 100% of the surface to touch the tooth, the cutter. If 80% is touching the cutter, it's okay, but obviously the higher the number, it's nice to have 100% of the outside touching the cutter. So, but if it's got a bit of wheel wobble in it, that means there's times where the wheel doesn't make contact with the tooth, and therefore it's not 100% efficiency. So please take a little bit of time when you mount your wheel and spin it and look for wheel wobble. If you have wheel wobble, try to adjust it and find it in a different position. If that fails, install another thin cardboard washer. Okay, next part we'll go on with the setting up of the grinder. Okay, so the next part that we're going to talk about, we've mounted the wheel. It's all nice and true. We want to make sure that the grinding wheel is right in the middle of the guide rail. So to do that, we've got this steel ruler that's put in to the rail. We've locked it in a position. And in the grinding position, which is down here, when we have a look, we want to see that that steel ruler is right in the middle of the nut. So if we zoom in, and we'll zoom in again, that's about as good as what you're going to get. That's excellent. Now, if it's slightly off, you can adjust it, and there is an adjustment. We'll just take this out. We'll just see if we can zoom in again. And I want you to have a look at that little gap that you can see here, this little gap here. That gap is made by adjusting this nut, turning it in a clockwise and putting a gap in here. So with a brand new wheel, I've gapped it so that the feeler gauge fits in, and that's the feeler gauge that I'm using, 20 thou, 0.5 millimeter gap. As that wheel wears down, I reduce this gap until the wheel's only about 115 mils, then this gap is non-existent. So yeah, that's the way that you sort of you've got to judge as the wheel wears down. You reduce that until eventually there's no adjustment on there, and you can try with the ruler. So if you use a ruler and do it that way, that's how you do it, and you shouldn't run into any problems. It's not perfect, but it's as good as what you're going to get. This is a very old style type grinder. It's a clone of an Oregon 511, and it has a few other features on there, and we can sort of talk about that. One of the other features is the depth screw here. That controls how deep that'll come into the chain. Normally when you look at a tooth, you'll see the chrome plating down the bottom. You don't want to be bringing the grinding wheel down past any deeper into the gullet. So that's what that adjustment's for. So we'll go over the other adjustment. The other adjustment is the top plate cutting angle. When we refer to the top plate cutting angle as opposed to the top plate, that is the top plate angle there. And this is a top plate cutting angle, because this is a beveled angle. You've got an angle on here which is 60 degrees, and you've got an angle on here. So this is a compounded beveled angle. As such, you set this to 60 degrees. You can set it to 50, which is more aggressive, but the more aggressive that you go, the less durable the chain will be, so it'll blunten much quicker. So for the most part, whether you're using semi-chisel or full chisel, the setting to use is 60 degrees. Also, if you come around the back here, get that out of the way. If you actually look on the back plate, and we'll zoom in there, you'll definitely see that it goes from 90 degrees over here all the way to 45 degrees down here. And because we set it at 60 degrees, there's also another indication marker. And we'll just see whether you can see that. Here. So every time you go to use the grinder, you can look here just to make sure it's set on 60. Personally, I'd set it on 60 and don't even worry about 55 or 50. As I said, if you got softer wood, yes, you could use it at 55, even 50. But certainly if you got hardwood, I'd leave it at 60. You're not going to reinvent the wheel by playing around with all these settings. And the same thing goes on the top plate. The top plate, you've got your adjustment left and you've got your adjustment right. Again, 25 degrees, which is here, is for hardwood, and 30 degrees is for softwood, generally speaking. But still use 30 degrees for semi-chisel and full chisel. So go by your manufacturer's recommendations, and they should be 60 degrees on the top plate cutting angle. So it should be 60 degrees here. And it's either 25 degrees for full chisel and 30 degrees for semi-chisel. And in Still's case, it's going to be 30 degrees for semi or full. So yeah, check with your manufacturer. The only other adjustment that you do have on here, and again, it's up to you whether you want to use it, is the tilt system, 10 degrees downward tilt. It reduces the hook that's on the tooth so that the hook is not too pointy. On some chains, they recommend to use on full chisel, 10 degrees downward tilt, so that this hook is reduced. It's not as pointy. If it's too pointy, it can damage a lot quicker. It's less durable. To do 10 degrees downward tilt, you loosen this nut here, and you can pull the vise towards you or push the vise away from you. When we're doing a right hand and a left hand tooth, the right hand side is closest towards the operator. The left hand side of the chain is towards the back of the grinder. Always view the left cutter or the right cutter from behind the grinder. So therefore, if we're going to do a right hand cutter and we're going to do 10 degrees downward tilt, push this away from you. So there's a little jingle. If you're going to do right hand tooth, the jingle goes right away. And that means right hand side, push that away. Left hand side, pull it towards you. Up to you whether you use it. As I said, still no longer recommend using that, probably because it can be very confusing and there's not a lot of gain by using it. So it's up to you. It depends on what your manufacturer recommends. A lot of Oregon chains still recommend 10 degrees downward tilt. I'm not too sure on some of the Husqvarnas. I don't use 10 degrees downward tilt. I just don't use it. I don't see the need for it. I've tried it and I don't see any big improvement on my chains. So that's my take on the 10 degrees downward tilt. It's there if you want to use it, but that's up to you, and it depends whether you go by the manufacturer's guidelines. Okay, the next adjustment. You've got this chain backstop. It can move away from you or it can move towards you. You've got an adjusting knob here. You normally adjust this if it gets too close to the grinding wheel, especially as the teeth get smaller and smaller. Just make sure that you adjust this and move it away from the grinding wheel. This is the adjustment to go in or back, and that's the lock nut. So we'll go over the setting up procedure of a chain. Just remember that the angles that I've spoken about, 60 degrees is fairly standard in the industry on the top plate cutting angle. 25 degrees for your full chisel, 30 degrees for your semi-chisel, and in the case of still, it's 30 degrees for semi or full chisel. So there are your angles. You're better off sticking with those angles. You can't make a mistake. Yeah, sure, you can experiment as what most other people do, but you won't change anything. It's all been tried and proven many, many years ago. The angles that I've just mentioned to you are the angles that you'll stick with and will give you the best results. Okay, the next segment we'll talk about is setting up the chain and grinding the chain. Okay, so we're going to set this up to grind. We already spoken about that this will be 60 degrees. In 99% of cases, you're only going to use 60. And in most cases here, we're only going to use 30. So we set it on 30 and it will be ready to grind. So when you pull this down, you want to make sure that it's touching the bottom of the gullet, and you don't want to make sure that it's going any deeper than where the bend intersects, where the chrome ends. That's the lowest you want to go. If you do need to go any deeper, you can adjust that there. So that's your depth stop. Now the next thing to make sure is that when we pull the grinding wheel down, you've got to make sure that with the adjustment, and if we just zoom back out, this adjustment here will loosen this off, and we need to turn this in so that the tooth just touches the grinding wheel. So we'll back off the cam a little bit more. It's just touching the grinding wheel now. It's probably just a little bit. We'll back it off a bit more, lock it up. Hear that? It's just touching. That's what you want. It's barely touching. So that's your starting point. So what we'll do now is start the grinder, and we can proceed to sharpen the tooth. Now we've got an LED light in there so we can see really good. Now when you bring this down, the biggest mistake people make is they bring it down too hard, so it's very lightly. See, it's barely touching, so therefore we can adjust this in a little bit. Still a little bit more. You're better off being on the side of caution. Now this chain was sharpened, so it's okay. It could probably possibly go just a little bit more. I'll do the next tooth. I'm only lightly sharpening this because it was done before. And if we zoom in, you'll be able to see I'm lightly tapping the up and down motion. You can see that up and down motion. Put your finger on there, it's not even hot. Now just continue doing that until you get to the end. Just remember that you're better off taking a minimal amount off the tooth, because you can always redo it again. But if you take too much metal off, then you can't put it back. So let's just say you've done all that side. So the next thing to do is unloosen this. Put this on 30 degrees on this side, and then we can set up on the right tooth. Now, the thing to remember here, what a lot of people do, you'll hear them say, oh, why does one side of my grinder grind more than the other side? It's because you've set up one side and you didn't set up the other side. You really need to make sure that when you bring this grinding wheel down, that you must set this side up as well. Look at that. It's not touching, so we can come in a little bit. It was pretty much spot on. Okay, so it's touching now. Now, I'm just going to check the depth. Now, to do the depth, that's quite easy. So what I'm going to do here, I'll just do a depth adjustment. Remember before I said I don't want to go any deeper than there? Well, if you have a look at the chain, it doesn't go any deeper, but we'll just check this side. So loosen that off and just tighten that up, and until you can just start to feel a bit of pressure on the screw, and that's the locking in position. So look, take the time and set up, if you start the right side first, take the time to set the left side up. So we'll just check one more time. Just want to get the camera in the right spot and zoom in there and make sure that we can see. We'll just... Now the other thing, there is clearance. You'll notice that the wheel gets close to this backstop arm. So be careful of that. I did mention that before. Feels just a fraction too tight, so we'll just back that off. Okay, we'll try that. Now this chain, as I said, was sharpened, so... Now the other thing is, what you can do, and we'll just zoom back out here, that because this arm here has a little bit of play in it, when you bring it down, like here, you can't, notice that there's no grinding, but if you put a bit of side pressure on it, it'll grind. So that works in your favour if you've got a little bit of play. Like if I just push this up and down, nothing happens. Put a bit of side pressure on it. So use that in your favour. Pull it down first, and if you can't feel anything, then put a bit of side pressure on it, because you will find, especially with a second-hand chain that's been ground down halfway, some teeth will be slightly longer than the others, especially if you've got some damage. Anyway, I hope that helps. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.